morning, at least here in Australia. What time are you at there, Wade, in the States?
7 o'clock Central Time.
On a Saturday?
Friday.
Friday night. So welcome to Theology Unleashed. We have two very special guests with us. James, who's appeared at least once before, maybe even more. And Wade, have you been on the channel before?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So probably been on here more than I have. This is just my second time round. So I'm just here to serve you guys.
Time too, actually.
Okay. So thanks again for coming back. So it means you must have enjoyed the last time. And so you're back again for another time. Anyway, thank you both for taking time. You could have been doing anything else, but you decided to come here and knock heads today. So thank you so much. Could I get you just both to do a quick introduction? James, could you start with just a slight introduction about yourself?
Sure. So I am currently studying a PhD at the University of Melbourne in decision computational neuroscience, and I'm interested in philosophy and questions of apologetics, and I'm an atheist and a naturalist, and yeah, happy to be here.
And you wrote a book, please.
Oh yeah, so my book is called Unreasonable Faith. It's a critique of William Lane Craig's arguments for Christianity. So check that out if you're interested.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Wade?
Yes, I'm Wade. That is my real name. My superhero name is Maverick Christian. I have a YouTube channel called Maverick Christian. Also a blog. I'm a philosophy student at the University of New Orleans.
Awesome. Okay, so what Wade's gonna introduce the topic here and also kick things off. So over to you, Wade.
All right, I'll just share my screen here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Not yet. Am I doing something wrong?
Oh, looks like we got it. All right, so
okay.
I'll just, oh, not that one. There we go. All right. The Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, or more specifically, my version of it. So, a defeater, roughly, is something that removes or weakens rational grounds for accepting some belief. So in the context of the Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, a defeater is such that one is rationally obligated to withhold the defeated belief. That is, not believe it, as by remaining agnostic about it, or by believing it to be false. So here's an example of a defeater in philosophy. While driving, I see what appears to be a barn from 50 meters away. I later learned that some eccentric has last week put up barn facades all over the area along with real ones, and that these fake barns are indistinguishable from real barns when viewed at a distance of 30 meters or more. And now I have a defeater for my belief that I had seen a barn. So more precisely, as Plantinga puts it, a defeater is a belief D that defeats another belief B for someone if that person will no longer be justified in believing B when coming to believe and continuing to believe D. So in this case, B is that defined barn, and D, the defeater belief, is that barn facades have put up in this area that are indistinguishable from real barns at that distance. So the symbolism for the argument R is the idea that our cognitive faculties are reliable. Now, the type of reliability here is such that not reliable means that you couldn't even trust your own cognitive faculties to know that scientists exist. So imagine someone dreaming when they don't know that they're dreaming. They typically don't have reliable cognitive faculties with respect to what's going on around them. N symbolizes naturalism. There's nothing supernatural. And E symbolizes the theory of evolution. So here it is in a nutshell. There's the probability of R given N and E is low. That's the probability thesis. Anyone who believes in an E and believes that the probability thesis is true has a defeater for R. That's the defeater thesis. And anyone who has a defeater for R has a defeater for pretty much any other belief she thinks she has, including N and E itself. And if 1 and 3 are true, then N and E is self-defeating. And the conclusion, therefore, is that naturalism and evolution, the conjunction of them, is self-defeating. So I'll introduce an argument for the defeater thesis. And these upcoming scenarios, Drug XX has a high probability of rendering one's cognitive faculties unreliable within 2 hours of ingestion. The minority who are immune to the drug have a blocking gene coding for a protein that blocks the drug's effects. The XX mutation is the mutation that injects drug XX into the bloodstream soon after one is born. So in this argument, I use a number of different scenarios. Scenario 1 is where I know Sam ingested drug XX. 24 hours later, he came to believe that he has a series of tests that has confirmed that he has the blocking gene, though I have no independent reason for thinking Sam's belief about the blocking gene is accurate. Now, since Sam attained this belief about the blocking gene long after he ingested drug XX, there's a reasonable chance that his belief was produced by unreliable cognitive faculties, and so this would be evidence for Sam's cognitive faculties is undermined by drug XX. So I have a defeater for Sam's cognitive faculties being reliable. Scenario S2 is just like scenario S1, but with me instead of Sam. I ingest drug XX, and 24 hours I come to believe a doctor has called me saying I have the blocking gene. But since drug XX only takes 2 hours to work, it seems like I'm screwed, epistemically speaking. I believe that I have the blocking gene is undermined by believing I ingested drug XX long before that. Scenario S3 is where I know through a nifty combination of philosophical and scientific argumentation, NNE entails that everybody has a XX mutation, but there's a small chance we got lucky and got the blocking gene. Again, the same principle applies. Any belief in favor of cognitive reliability comes after we believe drug XX entered our system is undermined. And scenario S4 is just the probability thesis scenario. So here's the argument, sort of like a slippery slope type of thing. R is defeated in scenario S1. Again, that's where Sam ingested drug XX. Far is defeated in S1, then R is defeated in S2, Far is defeated in S2, R is defeated in S3, and so on and so forth. And since S4 is just a probability thesis, 13 is relatively self-explanatory. And yeah, the argument is logically valid, and the premises, at least by my light, seem true. So for probability thesis, I need to introduce some philosophical terminology. So logically impossible means self-contradictory in a way that is impossible along the lines of logic mathematics. For example, largest prime number. Anything not self-contradictory is logically impossible. Is logically possible. So in philosophy, an argument is logically valid if it's logically impossible to have true premises and a false conclusion. Possible world is a complete description of the way the world is or could have been like. Metaphysically impossible is where a proposition is metaphysically impossible if it is true in no possible worlds. So some things that are not self-contradictory may still be metaphysically possible. For example, one might think it's morally permissible to torture infants just for fun is metaphysically impossible. A priori knowledge is known on the basis of pure deduction as opposed to observation. For example, mathematical truths and all bachelors are married. A posteriori knowledge is known on the basis of observations. For example, the shape of the earth. And conceivable means what cannot be ruled out a priori. Note that anything logically possible is conceivable. Or anything conceivable is logically possible. So, an example would be that it's conceivable that water is not identical to H2O because we knew the water long before we discovered water's chemical composition. So water's chemical composition was an empirical discovery. Water not being identical to H2O could not be ruled out a priori. Water's identity is an a posteriori fact. So we need empirical discovery to know that it's true, hence a posteriori. So some people believe water is identical to H2O is metaphysically necessary, even though it is conceivably false. In philosophy, X supervenes on Y if and only if there cannot be a difference in X without a difference in Y. So, for example, some people believe that mental states supervene on brain states. There cannot be a difference in mental states without there being a difference in brain states. Very roughly, brain states determine mental states on this view. Strong supervenience is supervenience that holds in all possible worlds. That is, it's metaphysically necessary. And epistemic probability, as I'm using it here, refers to the objective evidential relations among propositions. For example, there's an objective fact of the matter whether the scientific evidence makes the theory of evolution highly probable. Mental state, how I'm defining, is the inner aspects of one's mind as a pro tanto pertains to sense experiences, thoughts, feelings, etc. Such that a mental state is a collection of such pro tanto internal mental phenomena that one's neurophysiologically, for example, brain state produces. At least naturalism and contemporary science are correct about such matters. An accurate mental state is one that accurately reflects one's external world in a way that is necessary for reliable cognitive faculties. And by garbage mental state, I mean a mental state that diverges wildly from one's external environment, as in dreams, resulting in unreliable cognitive faculties. With respect to conceivable mental states of human-like complexity, garbage mental states vastly outnumber accurate ones. So an example, dreams when you don't know that you're dreaming, you usually don't dream of lying in bed. So, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
All right, good. All right, so the probability thesis. Now, in this case, I'm using epistemic probability. Basically, given just entity, it's epistemically likely that we don't have reliable cognitive faculties. So more specifically, I think it's more epistemically likely given entity that we would have garbage mental states, effectively living in a dream world. So one objection is, wouldn't organisms with reliable cognitive faculties be more likely to survive and reproduce than if their mental states were absolute garbage? So at first I thought so, and that's why initially I was unconvinced by the evolutionary argument against naturalism. So my rebuttal here for this, though, is that not necessarily thanks to the naturalistic mental states theorems. So to define some terms for these theorems, physical laws, by this I mean a certain outcome, O at the level of physics and chemistry will obtain a certain condition, C at the level of physics and chemistry obtain in the absence of supernatural intervention. By physical state, I mean the conjunction of physical laws and physical conditions. And the theorems, simplified, given naturalism, no matter which logically possible mental state associations obtained for a physical state, the resulting outcome from that physical state would be the same. In this way, mental states are effectively epiphenomenal on naturalism. So, for example, given a physical state of evolving organisms, whether they have accurate mental states or dreamlike garbage mental states would not affect the behavior of these organisms. They behave the same either way. So recall that when it comes to conceivable mental states, dreamlike garbage mental states massively outnumber those that accurately resemble one's external reality. So this is a major reason why the probability thesis is true. So the math is a little bit complicated, but to kind of give a rough description of the reasoning behind it. So imagine this thought experiment. Imagine we had the same physical state, same physical conditions and physical laws, but we had a different mental state associated with the brain. Would the outcome be any different? Well, the answer is no, because with the same physical conditions and the same physical laws and same physical conditions, the same outcome would result. So it doesn't matter which mental state the brain's electrochemical reactions result in for that physical state, that brain's behavior would be the same. So the summary of the theorems on naturalism, no matter which logically possible mental state associated obtained for a given physical state, the same outcome would result. In this sense, mental states are effectively epiphenomenal on naturalism. Implications are, again, given a physical state of evolving organisms, whether they have accurate mental states or even like garbage mental states, would not affect the behavior of these organisms. They behave the same either way. Now, when it comes to conceivable mental states, dreamlike garbage mental states massively outnumber those that accurately resemble one's external reality. So again, just think like when you're dreaming on bed, what you're dreaming very, very, very likely does not resemble what's actually going on around you. Garbage mental states, the dreamlike garbage mental states massively outnumber accurate mental states. So for the epistemic probability thesis, I argue this way. Imagine the alien scenario. There are aliens who are much like us in that they can form beliefs, change beliefs, etc., and their mental states have the same complexities that of a normal adult human. So in this scenario, our a posteriori knowledge, as it were, is limited to things like the universe fitting the formal model and the NMS theorems used. So for example, the universe has physical laws and physical conditions. Entity being true for the aliens, and there's little other background knowledge beyond what we know a priori. So let RA being the cognitive faculties of the aliens are reliable. Probability of RA given A and S is equal to this right here, because again, we're basically giving the assessing the epistemic probability of RA given just entity. So that's important because almost all a posteriori knowledge is excluded from the alien scenario apart from NE. So this is the probability thesis argument in a nutshell. Justification for 32 here. The numbers here match what's in the draft of the paper that I have currently. Vis-a-vis the probability of cognitive reliability given N and E, what is true for the aliens is also true for us, since in both cases we're basically considering the probability of cognitive reliability on just N and E. We're considering the alien probability thesis, 33, line 33 here, to help avoid bias towards other species and ignore irrelevant distractions. Justification for 33 can be done through the following deductive argument. So here's what we know on the alien scenario. Again, this is epistemic probability. You're trying to assess the probability, the likelihood of the aliens having reliable cognitive faculties given just the information in the alien scenario. So what do you know about this alien scenario? One of them is that mental states are effectively epiphenomenal. So for example, no matter which conceivable set of mental state associations obtained for a given physical state, that physical state's outcome would be the same. Vis-a-vis conceivable mental states, garbage mental states vastly outnumber those that accurately resemble one's external reality. We have no a priori reason to believe an alien would have an accurate mental state instead of the far more numerous garbage mental states, due largely to 35.1 and 35.2. Entity being true for the aliens is not an a posteriori reason to believe an alien would have an accurate mental state instead of one of the far more numerous garbage mental states. Now, again, mental states are effectively phenomenal. No matter which mental state association is obtained, the behavior would be the same. And so natural selection would be impotent in selecting among them because the organism's behavior would be the same. And most of the conceivable mental state associations are garbage. If 35.1 to 35.4 are true, then it's epistemically likely that the aliens have unreliable cognitive faculties given just the information in the alien scenario. But it's epistemically likely that the aliens have unreliable cognitive faculties given just the information in the alien scenario, and the alien probability thesis is true, and therefore the alien probability thesis is true. Now again, bears mentioning that 33.7 is asserting that the probability of alien cognitive faculties reliable given just the information in that alien scenario is low. So with factors like the NMS theorems implying that mental states are effectively epiphenomenal in naturalism, garbage mental states vastly outnumber accurate ones, all things considered, low alien probability thesis, and by extension, low probability thesis, seems difficult to successfully avoid when using epistemic probability. And again, to summarize the probability thesis, most conceivable mental states are garbage, and on naturalism, mental states are effectively epiphenomenal. So that seems likely to me. Defeater thesis, again, anyone who believes NNE and believes a probability thesis has a defeater for R. Basically, naturalism and evolution becomes akin to ingesting drug XX at a young age. Anyone who has a defeater for R has a defeater for pretty much any other belief she thinks she has, including NNE itself. 1 through 3 are true, then NNE self-defeating. Conclusion, NNE self-defeating. Now, you might have noticed that evolution plays very little role here in the argument. So in the paper, I give what I call the scientific argument against naturalism. So the NS theorems that render the E of evolution basically redundant. The same reasoning can be used for naturalism simpliciter. I'll give you a very brief overview of how that works. Just basically replace NNE with N, and the argument proceeds from there. Thus, if nothing else, simplifying the argument. For example, probability thesis, NNE becomes N. And the alien scenario, A star, is like AS except it omits evolution. Not necessarily that evolution is false, only that whether evolution is true is not part of the scenario, such that, for example, for all we know, the aliens have existed for as long as the universe has had time. So the first two scenarios would continue as before. 3 and 4 are a little bit different. And in naturalism entails drug X entered Bs and rendering that probability thesis low. So as 4 stars, P of R given N is low. Again, same structure as before. Same structure, just NNE replaced with N, and so forth. And basically, the reasoning is basically goes the same. Most conceivable mental states are garbage. On naturalism, mental states are effectively phenomenal, and naturalism becomes akin to ingesting drug XX at a young age, and as before. So that is it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Wade. Just a question, James. Had you seen that paper before, or this is the first time you're...
No, I'd seen those slides before, and I've read a blog post on this.
Oh, okay.
Maverick's written a few years ago.
Okay. Because it was going really fast, so I was just wondering how anyone was taking all that in. But if you're up to speed on that, so that's good.
If need be, I can put up the slides again.
Somewhat up to speed.
Specific slide if you want to talk about like a premise or something.
Yeah, so that would actually be helpful because I don't have any prepared slides. I thought it would be more useful just to, since we're debating the argument, to talk through the slides that you had. So maybe Maverick, if you can put up the summary slides of the argument, so we can sort of just make sure we're on the same page with the viewers as to how the argument's working before we delve into anything further.
My screen again. Oh, I gotta stop clicking on that.
Oops.
All right, so which slide? You want like the...
Well, the very last slide would do.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the last slide?
Yeah, I'm not... Oh, here we go. Yes. Okay, good. So what I just wanted to emphasize here are the two key premises, so premise 1 and premise 2. So the probability thesis here essentially saying that under naturalism and evolution, I'm sort of used to thinking it in terms of naturalism and evolution, although as you say, evolution maybe is not doing a whole lot of work, but under naturalism and evolution, the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable is low, or very low, I suppose you might say. And then under premise 2, we have the argument that anyone who believes premise 1 has a defeater for the belief that their cognitive faculties are reliable.
Well, they have to believe. And this, do you want me to go to the scientific argument or the EAN?
Well, they're pretty similar. I mean, maybe we'll stick with the EAN just because that's sort of the
sure
name of the debate. So that'll make a bit more sense. But the structure is pretty much the same. Yeah. Okay. So, so anyone who believes NNE and believes that the probability of reliable cognitive faculties under NNE is low has a defeater. So that's the defeater thesis. So just to be clear here, so I am not convinced by either of these two premises here, premise 1 or premise 2. So I think we can maybe look at those in turn. I find the probability thesis more interesting, although I think both need to be discussed. So perhaps we could start by talking about the probability thesis here. Now
I can go to the deductive argument for that.
Yeah, sure. That would be helpful.
And so I'm guessing it would be the you would dispute the alien probability thesis.
Yes, I don't know that the fact that they're aliens has much effect on analyzing the argument. I understand that's just for a sort of purpose of elucidating the point of the argument here. So
it's kind of like applying an outsider test.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the first premise here. Mental states are effectively epiphenomenal, which means that no matter which conceivable set of mental states associations obtained, that physical state's outcome would be the same. So I don't agree that mental states are epiphenomenal under naturalism. And indeed, I think that this is not a very popular view from naturalists. Certainly among cognitive scientists, at the very least, that I'm familiar with, there aren't many people who think that mental states don't cause things. There aren't many people who do think that, rather. So
theorems are proven, so that really shouldn't be in dispute. That mental states are effectively epiphenomenal in the sense established by the NMS theorems.
Well, the theorem is only good as its premises, right? So perhaps we could investigate those further then, if that is the disagreement.
The criteria. So what math can do is they can get you from A to B, and so what it assumes is a physical world with physical laws, physical conditions, and time. And you have that. You have the conditions in which the theorem applies. So did you read the paper?
Your draft paper? No, I didn't read all of it. I found it very confusing. But
okay, so yeah, I guess if you're not used to the math, it could be a little bit confusing. So I can give an oversimplified.
Well, you did have some slides on this, right?
Yeah, I did.
I would say that since we're having a discussion for the benefit of the audience, it's not really going to be very satisfactory to just say, read my paper and I prove it with math. Like, how is that persuasive to anyone? How does that help anyone make a decision about what to believe? I don't actually see. So if you could articulate why we should believe that, then I think that would be helpful, because that's a sticking point for me. I don't think mental states are epiphenomenal under naturalism.
So remember, I said effectively epiphenomenal in the sense that the theorem's established. So here is so I anticipate this might happen just in case you didn't read the paper or couldn't understand the math. Let's see. Slideshow. Okay. So here's an oversimplified version of the proof. N stands for naturalism. C is for physical conditions at the level of physics and chemistry. O is outcome at the level of physics and chemistry. L is equal to, by definition here, physical laws say that what outcome O will be given physical condition C and no supernatural intervention. So L is equal to, by definition, if N and C are true, then O will obtain. So a physical state is a combination of the physical laws and the physical conditions at a particular time. So for any logically possible supervenience relation of mental states supervening on brain states, SI, for a given physical state for an arbitrary time, the NMS theorem state that the following is a valid argument. So again, 1, L is equal to, by definition, if C and N are true, then O obtains. That's the definition of the physical laws here. If L and C and N and SI are true, physical natural state plus natural and plus supervenience relation, therefore O obtains. Again, the above argument being valid is what the NMS theorems say, that on naturalism manner, which logically possible supervenience relation SI obtains for a given physical state, that is the same physical conditions as physical laws, the same outcome would attain. So note that all you need for the animus theorems to apply here is for a particular time is for naturalism and physical state. So here's the derivation for some logically possible arbitrary supervenience relation SI. So L, that's from 2. For if C and N, then O obtains. That follows from 1 and 3. 5, C and N follows from 2. 6, therefore O obtains from 4
Sorry,
and
what's
5.
O here?
That's an outcome.
Oh, like a physical state.
Well, sort of. It's the outcome given to physical states and naturalism. So for any logically possible supervenience relations of mental states supervening on brain states SI for a given physical state and arbitrary triad, the animus theorems say the following is a valid argument. 1, L, if N and C are true, then O obtains. 2, L and C, and 4 obtains. So again, the argument being valid is what the animus theorems say, that on naturalism, no matter which logically possible supervenience relation SI obtains for a given physical state, that is, same physical conditions, same physical laws, the same outcome would obtain. Again, note that all you need for animus theorems to apply here is at a particular time in natural and physical state. So, summary of the theorems. On naturalism, no matter which logically possible mental state association obtained for a given physical state, that again is physical laws plus physical conditions, the same outcome would result. So in this sense, mental states are effectively epiphenomenal on naturalism. Implications. Again, given a physical state of evolving organisms, whether they have accurate mental states or dreamlike garbage mental states, would not affect the behavior of these organisms. They behave the same either way. And when it comes to conceivable mental states, dreamlike garbage mental states massively outnumber those that accurately resemble one's external reality. And that becomes a major reason why the probability thesis is true.
Yeah, so if we can look at that first stop point there, I think that's where the crux of this lies. You say no matter, well, the first stop point mentioned on naturalism. On naturalism, no matter which logically possible mental state association obtained for a given physical state, the same outcome would result. So, I mean, you mentioned this, so I'm a little bit confused here. So a supervenience relations are typically understood to be metaphysically necessary. And I assume that's why you're saying logically possible here. So I'm a little bit confused as to what the argument's supposed to be saying. It may be logically possible that there could be different mental state associations with different physical states. That is to say, I could, given a certain brain state, I could have a different mental state. But I don't think that's metaphysically possible because supervenience relations are metaphysically necessary. So why does it matter what's logically possible if it's metaphysically impossible?
All right, so I'll go back to the argument for the defeater thesis here. And first slide. All right, so again, mental states are effectively epiphenomenal. Again, no matter which conceivable mental state associations obtained for a given physical state, that physical state's outcome would be the same. So that is the premise. Now, one thing to note here is that our a posteriori information basically includes naturalism and evolution and not much else. So that means we don't know what the metaphysically necessary supervenience relation is. We only know what's conceivable because our a posteriori information is so limited. So think of like, we know that water is identical to H2O. That's an a posteriori fact. We can't determine that a priori. And so numerous strong supervenience relations are conceivable, but most of them will be garbage because this very, very limited information doesn't tell us what that supervenience relation is.
Doesn't tell us a priori, you mean?
Well, yeah, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So how is this not just an argument for global skepticism? I don't see how this is in any way specific to naturalism.
Well, you could, I suppose, expand it to naturalism. This argument.
You're saying we can't. Well, okay. Let me try to summarize what you're saying in simple terms to make sure I've understood it correctly. What you're saying is that we can't know a priori that there's any particular supervenience relation between physical, like brain states and mental states is the particular thing we're interested in here. And therefore, we can't know a priori that our mental states aren't all garbage because there could be lots of different relationships between brain states and mental states that don't lead to reliable beliefs. Is that the argument?
Well, it's a bit rough, but I think you've got the gist of it at least.
Okay, so naturalism doesn't appear to be doing any work there, right? Because you could say that for any worldview, we don't know a priori. Well, any worldview that requires any sort of a posteriori knowledge, I suppose. So anything that is, and by your definition there, that just means if something is conceivable, then we need some sort of a posteriori empirical knowledge to make the decision one way or another. So any worldview that seems to have empirical content or a posteriori content would seem to suffer from a similar issue, according to this argument, that we can't rule out logically possible, but even metaphysically impossible outcome. So what is specific about naturalism? You appear to just be arguing for some sort of global skepticism that we can't rule out any of these garbage mental states.
So this particular argument does not argue for global skepticism, but it
No,
also...
I know that it doesn't. I'm saying it appears that it actually has that implication. I don't see what naturalism has to do with this.
So what naturalism has to do with it is that I defined the NMS theorems specifically apply to a naturalistic universe. Now, you could argue that it only takes some minor tweaking so that it could also be used to argue for global skepticism. This argument does not contravene that notion.
Well, that's a problem with the argument. That's what I'm saying. I'm effectively using that as a reductio against your argument. I'm saying that obviously you've said that they're naturalism, right? But there's nothing that actually does any work there, right? You could say, you could just change that to non-physical states, right? Any type of states, right? If we can't know a priori whether there's a tight relationship between mental states and physical states, or like whatever world states we want to have beliefs about, then by the same logic, we would have to be in a position of skepticism about whether our mental states are reliable or not, and therefore we would have a defeater by the same reasoning. There's nothing specifically under naturalism that it seems to me that this applies to. It could, with just minor tweaks, apply to any worldview.
Well, remember, the only way a logically valid argument can fail to be sound is with a false premise. So here we are.
Oh, sorry.
Which
volume just went up there.
But remember, the way this argument works is that it's logically valid. For it to be unsound, there needs to be a false premise. So the fact that maybe global skepticism is true, well, even if that is, it doesn't really attack a specific premise.
Well, of course it does, right? Because unless we think that global skepticism is true, we can use that as the reductio of the argument. I've already told you that I don't agree with premises 1 or 2. I think we're mostly talking about premise 1 here. So if you have an argument that seems to entail global skepticism, I would say, look, I'm going to use that as a reductio against your argument. And then we can go back and look at all of the premises and see which ones we think might be false based on that. Now, your argument is so complicated and convoluted, it's a little bit difficult for me to work out which premises specifically. I mean, beyond this, right? I'm saying premise 1 here I disagree with, but when you go into the arguments for the arguments, it's maybe a little bit difficult to tell, but I'm pretty sure there's something going wrong there. Maybe I can elucidate a general line of thought there. So I don't think that we need to be in a position to rule out things a priori in order to know them. So I think that I'm not quite sure where that's fitting into your argument. It appears that it's coming in there somewhere. But the fact that I can't rule out a priori that I'm not a brain in a vat isn't, I think, a reason for that I can't justify believing that I'm not a brain in a vat.
Oh, I agree, but nonetheless, this argument is logically valid, so you'll need a false premise for it to be unsound.
No, I don't need to identify. It's not true that I need to identify a false premise in an argument in order to reject the conclusion. I can have further reasons for rejecting the conclusion, such as that, as I've said. If the argument entails absurd consequences, I can use a reductio to say, look, if this argument implies this, then the conclusion is false. Therefore, it follows that there must be a false premise. So let's look at this here. Mental states are effectively epiphenomenal. So by effectively, you seem to mean in a logical, in the sense of logical necessity rather than metaphysical necessity, right? They don't logically necessitate. Physical states don't logically necessitate particular mental states. Even if it's metaphysically necessary that there's a relationship between mental states, physical states and mental states, it's not a logically necessary state. That's what is contained in that premise. Is that correct? By effectively epiphenomenal.
Effectively epiphenomenal, as the paper explains, is that it sort of has a similar effect to epiphenomenalism.
Yeah.
And that, for example, no matter which conceivable mental state of association is attained for a given physical state, that physical state's outcome would be the same. So that's kind of similar in effect to what epiphenomenalism is.
Yeah, okay.
That's a term.
Yeah, so let's just look through here. We 33.3. We have no a priori reason to believe an alien would have an accurate mental state instead of one of the more numerous garbage mental states. On the basis of what I'm arguing for here, let's just grant that for the moment and see, because I'm pretty sure a priori is going to come into this here. So let's just try to work through all of this. Is not an a posteriori. Wait, entity being true for the aliens is not an a posteriori reason to believe an alien would have an accurate mental state instead of one of the far more. How did we? Yeah. So help me out here. How did we go from a priori in the first two to a posteriori in 33.4?
So 33.4 are due largely to 35.1 and 35.2.
Oh, 35. I missed that. Well, what were those?
Oh no, I didn't. I didn't correctly switch the numbers, so that should be 33.1.
Oh, it is 33. Okay.
Yeah. So
But the thing is, in that you're talking about a priori, and now we've gone to a posteriori, because this is critical, right? Because I'm saying we have a posteriori reason to believe that our beliefs can be accurate, effectively, or reliable. Maybe not a priori. I mean, that's a separate question. Maybe we could, but I'm just trying to dial in on one part of it for the moment. So okay, I don't understand how because that was the whole point about effectively epiphenomenal. You're saying, look, we can't know a priori that there's any particular association. Where I'm saying, look, we've got a posteriori for reasons for believing that there is a connection there. But now we've ruled that out in 33.4 somehow.
Okay, so for premise 33.4, it should be remembered that, and I explained this in the paper also, it should be remembered that part of what it means for mental states to be effectively epiphenomenal in naturalism due to the second third eminence theorem is that which logically possible mental state does not affect the universe's outcome, including an alien's causal behavior, thereby making mechanisms like natural selection useless in selecting which mental state of that conceivable mental state association set actually obtains for that alien. And so since most of the conceivable mental states would be garbage for an alien, for that physical state, natural selection would be useful in selecting an accurate mental state from that set over the many conceivable garbage mental states for that alien in university with time t. Since no matter which mental state association of that set obtains, the universe's outcome and thus the alien's causal behavior would be the same. And so consequently, mental states being effectively epiphenomenal, as 33.1 asserts, plays a major role in supporting 33.4.
But yeah, but I don't agree that there's no reason that there's no connection between physical states and mental states, right? I think that there's a metaphysically necessary supervenience relation. Now, you're trying to get around this by saying, look, we can't know that a priori, which is the effectively epiphenomenal part. But then I'm saying all that follows from that is that we can't know a priori that will have that the aliens' mental states won't be garbage. But potentially, I'm willing to accept that. I mean, again, I think that one could dispute that, but for the sake of argument, okay, we can't know a priori that they don't have garbage mental states. But why is that a problem? We know a posteriori that we don't have garbage mental states. That's what I would say. I mean, I'm an empiricist.
Well, remember, the a posteriori knowledge in this specific scenario doesn't go far beyond naturalism and evolution. Because mental states are effectively epiphenomenal, natural selection is useless in selecting an accurate mental state instead over the far more numerous garbage mental states.
Sorry, can you say that last sentence again?
All right. So I explained this in the paper. I use MUTP as a set of all conceivable mental states for naturalistic universe U at time t for physical entity P. Now, that has very large conceivable mental states. Now, natural selection is useless in selecting which among those mental states obtain.
Well, hang on. No. You're skipping here because that's only true if you assume that there's no metaphysically necessary supervenience relationship.
No. That doesn't play a role at all. So suppose there is
of course it does.
Strong... No, okay. I don't think you understand the
argument. Go ahead.
Suppose we accept that there is a strong supervenience relation.
Yep.
Suppose we even specify that in the scenario. Now, the fact that naturalism and evolution is true does not by itself tell us which of the strong supervenience relations obtains in this specific scenario. Lots of strong supervenience relations are conceivable. We don't know, given just the information, which strong supervenience.
Okay, yes, right. So this comes back to the conceivability point, because again, supervenience is typically understood, and I think that you say this as well, to be metaphysically necessary. So when you say which of them obtains, only one is metaphysically possible, but others may be logically possible, and we may not be able to determine a priori which obtain. It's not actually clear to me though that we need to say which obtains, right? Because all we would, well, let me try to explain it this way, right? We have reason to think, let's say it's a posteriori reason, like I'm happy with that. We have reason to think a posteriori or a priori that there is a metaphysically necessary supervenience relationship between brain states and mental states. What that means is that for any brain state, there is one unique mental state that it is associated with, and there can't be any others. No possible worlds are there any other relationships, right? Under those circumstances, natural selection will be able to select mental states just in virtue of selecting brain states, right? Because there's a one-to-one mapping between them. So I'm asserting that we do have a reason for thinking that there is a mapping between them. We don't need to specify the nature of that mapping, like, well, how specifically does it work, in order to have a reason for believing that there is such a mapping. Now, all that you seem to be saying is that we don't have an a priori reason for believing that there is such a mapping, which is 33.1 here. But I'm saying
No,
it doesn't
that's
need to be
not
a
what it says
priori.
at all. That is not what it says. So
What does it say then?
So 35.1 says that no matter which conceivable mental state association is obtained for a given physical state, that physical state's outcome would be the same. So in the paper, so again, this includes in the paper, I kind of specify, imagine MUTP is a set of all logically possible mental state associations for that universe U time T for physical entity.
When you say
T.
possible, you mean logically possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
not metaphysically
conceivable.
possible. Conceivable is the same thing. Well, it seems to me, because you're saying something is conceivable if it can't be ruled out a priori.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but so what? I'm saying we can rule it out a posteriori.
Okay. Now let's go back to 33.4 and ignore the incorrect numbers here. I'm saying that, so suppose we granted that there is some sort of strong supervenience relation. Now, lots of strong supervenience relations are conceivable, but most of them will be garbage. And naturalism and evolution being true and that's all the a posteriori information we have in this alien scenario. N by itself does not give us an a posteriori reason to believe an alien would have an accurate mental state, say an accurate strong supervenience relation, instead of a strong supervenience relation that gives us a garbage mental state.
So,
and again, the question is, what can we determine just given the extremely limited information in this scenario? And it seems to me that given just the extremely limited information in this scenario, we can't determine which of the conceivable mental state associations obtain.
Okay, so there's a few threads here. I think, all right, let's focus on the second part here. This comes back to what I was saying before. It seems to me that this can be tweaked slightly to turn it into a skeptical argument against for anything. So replace NNE with, I don't know, theism and Christianity, or like literally whatever you want. And couldn't this argument go ahead?
No.
Why not?
Well, you can like
with the necessary changes, obviously, for all of the different premises. You know, you change out N and E, obviously.
Well, here's a very trivial example. Suppose, for example, instead of probability of cognitive reliability given naturalism, you could say the probability of cognitive reliability given that there is a God, an omnipotent God who desires above all else for us to have at least somewhat reliable cognitive faculties. And that type of probability.
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously that's going to work, right? But that's not what I said. I said theism. Well, let's just start with theism. I said Christianity, actually, but why don't we just start with theism for a start? Because naturalism is quite broad, so let's pull in theism as a quite broad counter. Wouldn't the argument be able to go ahead there? Because there are many conceivable, a priori conceivable mental state, physical state associations that could pertain under theism, and we can't know which of them pertains a priori, right? So isn't the argument effectively the same here?
Well, a theist could argue that theism is an a posteriori reason for us to believe that we have reliable cognitive faculties. God is all good and wants moral agents and all that.
There you go. That's my response. That's literally what I've been saying. We have a posteriori reason under naturalism for thinking that we have reliable cognitive faculties. So you've just given the same response that I would give.
Well, I think what you would how I would attack the argument here is I would actually grant that naturalism and evolution by itself. Now, again, this probability thesis says, given basically just naturalism and evolution, the odds that our cognitive faculties are reliable are low. But a naturalist could do is say, yes, naturalism and evolution is true, but there's this other proposition in P, I believe, that given N and E and P, the fact that our cognitive faculties are reliable is actually quite high. And P could be that particular strong supervenience relation that gives us that where the, lucky us, the mapping is such that we would have reliable cognitive faculties. But this particular argument is saying given just naturalism and evolution. That's a probability thesis. I don't think you can say given, well, evolution is true and there's no supernatural, therefore a strong supervenience relation obtains that gives us reliable cognitive faculties. I don't think you can determine that just from naturalism and evolution itself. It seems like you would need additional a posteriori information.
Yeah, well, that's essentially what I've been saying. And you seem to agree that that's true under other worldviews as well. So in which case, this premise doesn't actually seem very interesting.
Well, it's important for 33.7 here. So again, it's important to remember what the probability thesis actually is saying here. It's just saying the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable given basically just naturalism and evolution is low.
Yeah. So
Now, if you agree with that, you
when
would
you say
probably want to move
PR
on to
given N and E, that doesn't actually entail that it's just that. I suppose implicitly you're sort of saying that we have to marginalize over all other possibilities. So I have to think about that aspect of it. But you're being very clear that it's only conditioned on those two,
basically,
naturalism
yeah.
and evolution. It's low. Yeah, so let me then try to re-articulate this. Effectively, what you're saying is that the probability of reliable cognitive faculties, a priori, so without considering any further information other than belief in naturalism and evolution, or in fact, other than the other version of the argument, it's just naturalism. It's unlikely we would have reliable cognitive faculties because there's many possible associations that could exist between our mental states and the physical states of affairs, most of which lead to garbage mental states.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, and absent further information, we can't rule out those garbage ones. Yeah, so it just seems to me that this argument goes through with many other worldviews as well, such as you're replacing naturalism with theism there. The exact same argument could be used.
Well, I would. Theists might dispute that. A theist might say a perfectly morally good God.
No. Conditional just on theism.
Yeah, and a theist could believe. Well, what are you saying by theism? Do you mean like a traditional monotheism, or do you mean just like?
No. I just mean theism. There's a God with the standard omni properties. Let's say just that. Just as naturalism is the belief that there is no such thing.
Well, a theist could argue that theism would be an a posteriori reason to believe for us to have reliable cognitive faculties because there's an actual omnipotent agent who would desire that to happen.
But how do you know that they would desire that would happen? That's a further belief. That's not entailed by theism that God would desire any particular thing about our mental states.
Well, it depends on I suppose on our conception of theism.
No. It can't, right? Because we're only allowed to believe in theism. I'm holding you just to that as you held me just to the naked belief in naturalism. I'm holding you to naked theism and asking you, is anything about our cognitive faculties entailed by mere theism? And it seems to me that it isn't.
Well, is our traditional concept of theism is that God is morally good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Omnibenevolent.
So I think
that's all you get.
So I think that argument could work if by omnibenevolent and you don't have the nature of what that morally good is. If you limit it to that and don't, for example, exclude what God's morally good nature is, because my thinking was that what is built into the conception of theism here is God's morally good nature. Like the more details of what
I'm acknowledging it's omnibenevolent, but I'm not going to let you give a particular theology of what that is, because the reason that seems improper is that there are very few people who are just naturalists, right? By naturalists, they actually mean that they accept a whole bunch of stuff of findings that have been provided by the sciences, and on the basis of those findings, I think that we have reason to believe our cognitive faculties are reliable. But you're going to say, no, you're not allowed to appeal to those because that's a posteriori stuff. That's more than just naturalism. So I'm going to say, look, we have to be fair here and say, no, you can't appeal to particular understandings of, God's goodness and how it works out in the world. You just have the base idea of theism. And under that, it seems that there's many possible associations between our mental states and reality.
So I will agree and disagree. And here's what I mean by that. If you have, I agree in the sense that if you have the God omni attributes and you say God is morally good, but you exclude from that what is in fact morally good. So, for example, we're not theism. We're not mentioned for the fact that it is good to be loving, it is good to be kind, it is good to be just. If you exclude all that from the theistic hypothesis, then and have like absolutely no idea whatsoever, no information about what is good and what is bad, then I think you can get same sort of probability thesis with respect to theism.
Yeah, well, okay. So I think that's most of what I wanted to establish there. Although maybe I'll just push a little bit further and say, look, supposing that we did give you some extra room to grant those, I still don't, the virtues that you just mentioned, I'm still not sure how it follows that we would expect God to want our mental states to be reliable.
God would want us to be, this would depend on the nature of the deity, but if God would more likely want us to be moral agents, and for moral agents, our cognitive faculties would be at least somewhat reliable in interacting with our fellow members of our species. But from what I've talked so far, it seems like your beef might not be with a probability thesis, but with a defeater thesis. Because what I could do if I were to put on my naturalist hat is say, okay, given just naturalism and evolution, it is likely that our cognitive faculties are reliable, but we know some proposition P that makes it likely our cognitive faculties are reliable, in which case our dispute would go to the defeater thesis, not the probability thesis.
Yes, that's fair. And that's where I want to turn to. I'm just emphasizing here that I think that the way you've defined the reliability thesis makes it kind of uninteresting because it's going to be true under most worldviews. Now, there's caveats there about exactly what we build into the worldview and what we think is knowable a priori. I think that you can make some a priori arguments that we should have some degree of cognitive reliability under naturalism. But I don't think I want to go there today. So why don't we then move to talking about the defeater thesis then?
All right. Okay. So here are the scenarios. And just as in the paper, it's a deductive argument, kind of a slippery slope thing. And so is there now, as also explained in the paper, premises 10 through 13 are material conditionals. Now, do you know what a material conditional is?
Yes, I'm more interested here on that. So can we just revisit the defeater thesis so that we make sure, because this is the argument for the defeater thesis. So I just want to make sure we're both on the same page about what that says precisely. Okay, anyone who believes N and E and believes the probability of reliable cognitive faculties given N and E is low has a defeater for R. So at this point, let me just ask, how does this fit with your offered response here saying that we may simply believe additional propositions that render the probability of reliable cognitive faculties higher, conditioning on those additional propositions? Because it actually seems that you could agree here if you think that PR given N and E is only believing those things, right? But the thing is, the naturalist doesn't just believe N and E; they believe lots of other things as well. So does this argument only apply to people who only believe N and E, or does it apply to naturalists who believe other things as well?
It would, well, presumably naturalists believe other things as well. So yeah, it would, according to the defeater thesis anyway, that's the idea.
But that's not what premise 2 says.
Premise 2 says anyone who believes N and E and believes that N and E R given N and E is low has a defeater for R.
But we've established based on the probability thesis that the probability of R given N and E, when you say that, you mean the probability of R given only N and E?
Roughly, yes.
Right. So premise 2 doesn't seem to apply to naturalists who believe in many things in addition to N and E.
Well, let's look at 2 again. It says that anyone who believes N and E. Now, it doesn't say anyone who just believes N and E. It doesn't say anyone who believes only N and E and nothing else. That is not what premise 2 says. That's not what the defeater thesis says.
Okay, then. So how do we get to the fact that it states that people who believe the probability of R given N and E is low. That refers to people who believe that the probability of R given N and E alone is low.
Roughly.
So how do we exclude the impact of their other? Let me put it this way: you're saying that someone who believes a certain thing must believe something else, or should has a defeater for R, right? So that's about what they should believe. So how do we exclude the impact of their other beliefs acting as counter defeaters or providing additional evidence? I suspect this is probably in the justification for the defeater thesis, but I'm just trying to get to the point of disagreement where that lies exactly.
Okay, yeah. So the paper explains this as well. In section, what is the section?
So I have looked through these scenarios. I don't know that we want to talk through all of them here. I think scenario, which was the last one? Was it 6? Is the most relevant one.
Well, I think you might want to look at that paper again. I updated it for this debate. I think you might be looking at an old version.
Well, quite possibly. But I'm also not debating with the paper. I'm debating with you. So if we can focus on how you would like to articulate it here.
Yeah. So in this presentation, there is no scenario S6.
Oh, okay.
So notice that there are only 4 scenarios here.
Wait, but didn't you have a slide that showed more than that? Or maybe I'm confusing myself.
No, there are no slides that have more than that. Nothing in this presentation has 6 scenarios. Just 4.
Okay, I was probably just looking at an older version. So
yeah, so back
scenario
to
4 then, perhaps.
Yeah. So again, it's you would for the argument to be unsound here, there would have to be a false premise. But going back to your question, in section 2.3.5 of the paper, there's a situation that I call the undermining problem. And to illustrate this, consider scenario S1, where Sam ingests drug XX. Now, Sam also believes that, now again, the drug renders one's cognitive faculties unreliable within 2 hours, or has a high probability of doing so. Now, Sam believes he has the blocking gene. It's like, oh, I passed cognitive reliability test, I have the blocking gene. But Sam only came to this belief like days later after he ingested drug XX. So it seemed that, and I have no independent reason for thinking that Sam's belief is correct. So it would seem that this would be my belief that Sam has passed cognitive reliability test is undermined by Sam having ingested drug XX. Now, we can think of that as in scenario S2. Suppose I ingest drug XX, all right? But days later, I come to believe that I have reliable cognitive faculties because of cognitive reliability tests. So if I believe that I ingest drugs XX, but I also believe that days later, I have passed cognitive reliability tests. Well, it seems any belief that comes after I know that I've ingested drug XX is kind of undermined by the idea that I have ingested drug XX. And so that's the undermining problem. And so what I kind of argue here in the paper is that it seems like we have a similar situation for NNE, or for the scientific argument against naturalism itself. So it seems that because naturalistic evolution already gave us our cognitive faculties, any belief that comes after that would be undermined. So that's the idea. So apparently, it seems like the undermining problem exists in scenario S1. It seems to also exist in scenario S2. Which of these scenarios would it seem to fail at? That I think becomes a bit tricky, where the undermining problem stops being a problem.
So the let's just be clear here. So you've said drug XX and XX mutation. Is the drug is a drug that causes our cognitive faculties to be unreliable? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And what's XX mutation?
The XX mutation is a mutation that injects drug XX into our bloodstream shortly after we are born. So it's basically
so it's the same thing as drug X, effectively, but just
yeah. So
birth.
It's basically yeah.
Okay. How does NNE entail XX? How does NNE entail that our cognitive faculties will be unreliable?
Are you talking about S3 or S4 here?
S3.
So S3 is a fictional scenario. I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I don't mean literally XX, right? But I mean, oh okay. So you're saying if it entails, then it's low. Oh okay. So. Okay, maybe it's S4 then that we should look at. Okay, yeah, let's talk about S4 then. I think that was the one I mentioned before. So what's the problem with, so again, I'm struggling to see the connection here. Hopefully we can work through the logic here. So let's say that a priori, the probability of reliable cognitive faculties given NNE is low. That's what we've just been discussing. What follows from, why is that an underminer for our beliefs?
For the same reason it is in scenario S1, same reason it is in scenario S3.
Well, why is it in scenario S3 then?
For the same reason it is in scenario S2.
Well, let's go back to S1 then. Why is it in scenario S1?
So in scenario S1, Sam, I know that Sam has ingested drug XX. And I also know that days later, Sam comes to believe that he has passed cognitive reliability tests, but I have no independent reason for thinking that Sam's belief is correct. And so because I think Sam's belief is likely produced by Sam's belief that he has passed cognitive reliability test was likely produced by unreliable cognitive faculties, since that belief came long after he ingested drug XX.
Maybe we'll go to scenario 2, because I feel like that's just easier if we talk about in the first person. So in S2, you ingest the drug and then you engage in tests which show that you have reliable cognitive faculties, or you believe that you do?
Come to believe that days after I ingest drug XX.
Yeah, okay. And then you're saying on the basis of the fact that we've ingested drug XX, we shouldn't trust our belief that we've passed those reliability tests.
Yeah, because it came after that. Basically, it's tainted by that point.
Okay. But surely that only holds if we hold no other relevant beliefs about, the drug or the reliability tests.
Basically, yeah. So in this case, I did not come to believe in the blocking gene prior to ingesting drug XX. All these, saving beliefs or would be evidence that I have cognitive reliability reliable cognitive faculties comes after I ingest drug XX.
Right. And so you're going to say that's analogous to evolution.
Yeah, hence scenario S3.
So naturalism and evolution entails, right? Okay, but see, there's still something that I don't quite understand here, because scenario S3 doesn't say that naturalism and evolution does entail the mutation. You're saying that if it did.
Well, in this scenario, it does.
Well, that's what I mean, but I don't think it does in reality. So what does the scenario have to do with anything?
Excellent question. So here is the deductive argument here. So line 12 here is that if R is defeated in an S3, then R is also defeated in S4.
And S4 was the final scenario.
Yes.
Okay, so why should I believe that?
Why should you believe in S3
12.
and S4? Or 12? Okay. So as the paper explains, the general idea for the justification is there does not seem to be a relevant difference between the two scenarios where R is defeated in one and R is not defeated in the other. So in this case, S3 and S4, really the only difference here is the mechanism of probable cognitive unreliability. So in S3, that mechanism is the XX mutation, whereas in S4, it is presumably something else, like mental states being effectively epiphenomenal, for example. And so by my lights, the mechanism of probable cognitive unreliability is not a relevant difference.
Yeah,
That's
so
the justification for.
Let me just clarify something. So scenario 4, can we go back to the scenarios?
Sure.
Is scenario 4 saying that I come to believe that probability is low? Is that what the scenario constitutes?
Yeah, that's
You
certainly
come
at
to
least
believe
part
it.
of it. Yeah, I come to believe it. That's part of the scenario.
Yeah, right. But then that's a relevant difference, right? In scenario 3, you've told me that entity actually does entail unreliable cognitive faculties. Scenario 4 merely says that I come to believe that a priori, under naturalism and evolution, I can't know that my cognitive faculties are unreliable. That's a completely different claim. One is simply a lack of a priori, the lack of a priori knowledge of something, whereas scenario 3 is actually saying that it is the case.
Well, I believe it's the case in scenario S4 as well.
No, but that's not what scenario S4 states. Scenario S4 just if I've understood it correctly, and that's what I'm asking here, but it just states I come to believe that the probability of R given entity is low. That doesn't say anything. That is completely different to saying that basically R actually is low under entity, which is basically what scenario 3 is saying.
Well, if it's unclear, I think I mentioned it here. I might have to check my paper. If need be,
I'm asking you what the difference. Sorry, not what the difference is. I'm saying that this appears to be a significant difference. So, have I understood that correctly? Scenario 3 says that basically our cognitive faculties actually are unreliable under entity, whereas S4 just simply says that I come to believe that a priori there's no reason to believe that our cognitive faculties are reliable under entity.
No, that's not quite scenario S4 is. Scenario S4, part of what scenario S4 is that the probability thesis is in fact true. And I also come to believe that it's true. So in S3, by the way, it is also true that I come to believe that entity entails the XX mutation. I mean, it's not just the fact that the probability thesis is true, it's also that I come to believe it. And in scenario S3, it's not just that entity entails the XX mutation, I actually come to believe it. Hence the defeat your part here. I believe this is mentioned in the paper. Yeah, it's in the paper.
So the probability thesis is actually true
in this scenario.
But that doesn't change the fact that it's still a thesis about probability, about a priori probability.
Well, sort of. It's actually it's epistemic probability.
Yes.
It's basically a propositional evidence. Given NNE is basically the state of information, roughly, and R is the probability of that, given that state of information is low. And NNE entailing the XX mutation, that is what renders in this scenario the fact that the probability of argument NNE is low, given that state of information. So difference between S3 and S4 is that the mechanism of behind what makes the probability thesis true is different in both cases.
Yeah, the mechanism is different, but it seems to me that S4 is not telling us anything about the state of affairs in the world. It's only telling us about our belief in that state of affairs. That you said the probability thesis is true, but that's still a probability thesis. It's still a statement about epistemic knowledge. Epistemic knowledge, that's redundant. It's telling us it's making a knowledge claim, not a metaphysical claim, which S3 is. So let me just clarify why I think that's important. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that if NNE does actually entail that our cognitive faculties are unreliable, then we shouldn't believe.
Oh, no, it doesn't. Not in S3.
Sorry?
It doesn't entail that our cognitive faculties are reliable.
Unreliable.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't entail that our cognitive faculties are unreliable. So remember, the XX mutation, now, if you adjust drug XX, that's not a guarantee that your cognitive faculties are reliable. It's just highly likely that your cognitive faculties are unreliable.
Okay, excuse me. Yes, highly likely then. High probability. So if NNE entails makes it highly likely that our cognitive faculties are unreliable, then plausibly, I'm not sure I agree, but let's just grant it for the sake of argument that we should, that acts as a defeater for our belief that our cognitive faculties are unreliable. But that's saying that NNE actually does render our cognitive faculties most likely unreliable. S4 is not saying anything of the sort. S4 is simply saying that it is the case that we cannot know a priori that our cognitive faculties are unreliable given NNE.
Sort of.
Isn't that precisely what PR conditional on NNE is? You've said only that conditioning only, so we only know NNE, then R is low.
Yeah.
So that being true, like that could be true, but I could still be justified in believing R if I have other reasons for believing it.
Okay, so why doesn't that work in, say, scenario S3?
Because in scenario S3, you've told me that my cognitive faculties are probably unreliable, given that NNE entails that.
Did I now?
NNE entails that my cognitive faculties are probably unreliable.
So why does that hold? So why does that hold true for S3 but not S4?
Because S4 makes no statement about whether NNE entails cognitive faculties unreliable.
It says NNE, given just that information, it entails that it's likely their cognitive faculties are unreliable.
Yes, exactly, and that's the difference I'm emphasizing here. One is a
That's the
metaphysical
same
claim.
in S3, though. And the same in
No,
S3.
it's not. It's not the same in S3 because that's a metaphysical claim. One is a claim about the way the world is. The other is a claim about what we can know about it a priori. That's the difference.
No, S3 is something similar. In S3, it's figure it out what we could roughly describe as a priori, that NNE entails the XX mutation. Now, of course, that's not real life. But in this case, we could say S3, given just NNE, that strictly implies that would give us the XX mutation. And that's what makes the probability thesis true in that scenario.
Yeah, I'm not asking about the probability thesis in S3. I'm asking about the first part of what you've said here. NNE entails XX, which means our cognitive faculties are probably unreliable. So you are stipulating in S3 that if naturalism and evolution pertain, then they entail that our cognitive faculties are probably unreliable.
Well,
is that what that says?
Not exactly.
What are you saying then?
Okay, naturalism and evolution, it says, so S3 is that given naturalism and evolution tells the XX mutation, given just that information, it is likely that our cognitive faculties are unreliable. Now, if, of course, you could add additional propositions to this. You could say, yes, given just NNE, our faculties are probably unreliable, but we also know that we passed cognitive reliability tests, or we also know that we got the blocking gene, and so on and so forth. So one could reason that way.
Yeah, I'm still unclear here about what you're saying in S3. So maybe I'm just a bit slow here, but are you saying that we believe that NNE entails the XX mutation, or that it actually does?
It actually does in this scenario, and we
okay,
believe
yes,
that
that's what I thought. That's what I thought. You're making a claim about the way things actually are, not just a claim about our belief or our a priori belief specifically. Whereas S4 is a claim about a priori beliefs. So that's what the P is. It's a probability statement about epistemic probabilities you mentioned before. That is the critical difference here, it seems to me.
So why would the mechanism...
No, it's not about the mechanism of unreliability. It's about what you're claiming. In S3, you claim that NNE actually entails that our cognitive faculties are probably unreliable or likely to be unreliable. Whereas S4, you're not saying that. You're just saying that it is the case that epistemically speaking, we cannot know a priori that our cognitive faculties will be reliable given NNE. And I'm saying, okay, yeah, sure, maybe that's true. But it doesn't matter because we have lots of other ways to know that our cognitive faculties are unreliable, are probably reliable rather under naturalism. So that's the difference between scenario S3 and S4. One is telling us about what actually is the case in the scenario, and the other one doesn't say anything about that. It just says what we believe about it a priori.
I think you might have misunderstood. By mechanism of probable cognitive reliability, as explained in the paper, what that term means is just whatever it is that makes the probability thesis true. That's it. That's what mechanism of probable cognitive reliability means in this context.
Yeah. Okay.
So
well,
in S3, well, they're both. I mean, I don't see how you could say S3 is metaphysical and S4 is not, because they're both naturalism and evolution. That's a metaphysical claim. They're both making metaphysical claims
okay,
in that sense.
No. So there's a clear difference here, unless I've completely misunderstood the scenarios, but I've tried to ask the questions to clarify that. So the difference here is that N and E does not have a P in front of it. So you're asserting that that is the case. When it has a P in front of it, that is an epistemic probability claim about what we know, and specifically what we know a priori, because again, that's the context here. That is the difference between the scenarios. One is asserting that there is a state of affairs and saying what would happen under that state of affairs, essentially. The other one is not saying anything about what is true. It's just purely our epistemic knowledge of that. Why do I say that again? Our knowledge of the situation, a priori knowledge. That's the difference, it seems to me. So if you want to call that a different mechanism for why P is low, well, then fine. I find that word confusing here, but sure. But that seems to be absolutely critical here, because just to come back to put this in the context of why I'm making this point here, in scenario S4, I could just think, well, sure, PR given N and E is low, okay, but I have other reasons for thinking that my cognitive faculties are probably reliable. It's that just aren't exhausted by what I can know a priori under naturalism and evolution.
Okay, so why doesn't that work in S3?
Because you've told me that it can't work.
Well, I don't think it works in either in S3 or S4, so you're going to have to be more specific, other than just taking my word for it.
N and E entails XX mutation, which means our cognitive faculties are probably unreliable. So you've told me that it is the case that N and E entails that our cognitive faculties are probably unreliable.
No, that's
literally what it says there. Come on, man. It literally says that.
No, it doesn't. It says N
and E entails XX mutation. What does that mean?
N means the likelihood that we have the XX mutation given just naturalism and evolution is 1. And it's saying this is what makes the probability thesis true.
Yeah. And that isn't the case in S4. S4 just says it is low.
N and E, the mechanism for probable cognitive unreliability is presumably something else, I suppose. Yes. So
yeah,
why would the different mechanism of probable cognitive reliability, why would that make a relevant difference when it induces the same likelihood of improbability?
Because in S3, if I were to say, look, I have other reasons for thinking that my cognitive faculties are reliable given N and E, that would entail having a false belief. Whereas in 4, it doesn't.
Why would it entail having a false belief in S3?
Because you've told me N and E entails that I have unreliable cognitive faculties. So if I said,
it doesn't
well, actually it doesn't, then that wouldn't make sense, because, well, I mean, it would make sense, but it would be false, right? Because I would be thinking, well, actually, there's another factor that means that it could be reliable even under N and E. But you've said, no, it isn't, because N and E entails the mutation.
Well, it doesn't entail that that we don't have the blocking gene, though. So we could have, so you could say, yes, N and E entails the XX mutation, but I don't believe just N and E entails the XX mutation. I also believe that we pass cognitive reliability test. I also believe that I have the blocking gene. So you can
None of these scenarios say anything about a blocking gene. So if you're going to introduce that, I think we would need to reformulate.
No, it does. The scenario.
As I've said before, I'm not arguing against your paper. We're having a discussion here. So I'm not really interested in what your paper says. So if we can just focus on what you're claiming, because we've been talking about this for about 20 minutes, and now you've just mentioned the blocking gene. It's a little bit hard for me to assess that when it doesn't say anything about that here. So I'm not sure how the blocking gene fits into this.
I mentioned the blocking gene right here.
Okay, let's talk about that then. So XX mutation, a mutation that injects drug XX into the bloodstream. Well, that doesn't say anything about the blocking gene. Oh, hang on. Drug XX is injected. Okay, so we look back here. High probability of randomized cognitive factors unreliable within 2 hours. The minority who are immune have a blocking gene. Okay, but this is the probability thing, right? You're saying it has high probability.
Yes.
Of rendering. Yeah, okay, right. So the blocking gene is that mechanism of, well, maybe it doesn't, right? Because there's the blocking gene probability.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
well, and that's why couldn't one just apply that same argument and say, yes, it entails the X mutation, but I don't just believe N and E. And I also believe that I pass cognitive reliability test. I also believe that I have the blocking gene. So you could apply that same strategy S3. And in my opinion, by my lights, I don't think that that works. I think it suffers from the same undermining problem that S2 does.
So in S3, so let me try to understand what you're saying here. You're saying that in S3, I could say, look, I have other reasons for thinking that I've got the blocking gene, if you want to put it that way. An entity entails the mutation, but it doesn't entail that I don't have the blocking gene. Okay,
Yes.
so so you're saying then that that's a problem because... Oh, so I'm lost here. Why, if we have independent reasons for thinking that we have the blocking gene, then what's the problem with that?
That is the problem. You don't really seem to have independent reason for doing that, for the same reason you don't in scenario S2. So imagine that we tried something similar with scenario S2. I ingest drug XX. Now, it has a high probability of rendering my cognitive faculties within 2 hours ingestion. Now, suppose days after I ingest drug XX, I come to believe that I have the blocking gene. I come to believe I passed cognitive reliability tests, and so on and so forth. So I could reason that, okay, yes, given the probability just that I ingested drug XX, it's likely that I have unreliable cognitive faculties. But I believe this other stuff. I also believe I have the blocking gene. I also believe I passed cognitive reliability tests. The problem is that all this came in long after I ingested drug XX. And the fact that I ingested drug XX, that would seem to undermine my would-be evidence for my cognitive reliability in that situation.
Right. Well, it seems to me that depends on the nature of what we think encounters evidence for something. Because I'm not sure that any type of evidence is going to be let me put that another way. So if I believe that I've taken a drug that causes my cognitive faculties to be unreliable, it's not obvious to me that that automatically defeats all other beliefs that I might have. I mean, why would it? It's just one belief against all of the others that I have.
Well, it depends on the nature of your noetic structure, I suppose. If, for example, you had the belief that you had the blocking gene prior to ingesting drug XX, then I think that would become like a defeater feeder, or rather a defeater deflector, I suppose would be a more technically accurate term. But the problem in scenario S2 is that I come to have this belief that I passed cognitive reliability tests long after I ingested drug XX, and that would seem to undermine the would-be evidence for my cognitive reliability.
Well, but I'm not sure that that's right, because it depends on when you come to believe that you ingest the drug.
Yes, that's what I said.
Yeah, so if I come to believe that I have, if I have reason to think that I have the blocking gene before I come to believe that maybe I don't.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Well, then what's the problem? Because, I mean, most naturalists come to the table with a whole bunch of beliefs about the way the world is that are not a priori.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
So won't those deflect this as an issue? Because they're like, well, okay, so maybe there's this consideration in virtue of which I have to be concerned about my cognitive faculties, but I have all these other considerations that I've considered beforehand. And in virtue of those, I think that they deflect this defeater, as you put it.
All right, so does that work in scenario S3? Because remember, in scenario S3, you come to have these beliefs after drug XX entered your bloodstream. So that, it seems to be a problem. The undermining problem seems to apply in S3 for the same reason it does in S2. All these beliefs come in after drug XX entered the bloodstream.
Yes, but the relevant point, it seems to me, is when my belief comes about as to when... sorry, I didn't say that very well. When does my belief come to be formed about whether I've had the drug or not, or whether I have the mutation?
Okay, so so let's see if I'm understanding you this correctly. Suppose in scenario S3, I came to believe that entity entails the XX mutation, but I come to believe that after I have all these beliefs about passing cognitive cognitive
effectively, yes.
And so forth. Okay, so in my opinion, by my lights, it seems to me that even though the belief in the XX mutation came afterwards, it's nonetheless true that your belief came in after the time in which drug XX entered the bloodstream, or so you believe.
Yes.
That would seem to be, by my lights, be undermined.
Okay, let's talk about that, because I think we might be getting to the crux of it. So why does that undermine the belief?
Because
that I have reliable cognitive faculties.
Because these beliefs came in after drug XX entered the bloodstream.
So could you just flesh that out? Why is that important? I mean, this might seem nitpicky, but I think this actually matters. Why does it coming after matter?
For the same reason it does in S2.
Now, can you just explain it without saying in the same? Because ultimately, you're going to have to give an explanation, right? So, what's the reason why it matters? Why it comes afterwards, after the mutation?
So in scenario S1, Sam believes he ingested drug XX, and he came to the belief, or let's modify the scenario this way. Maybe this will make it easier. Suppose I know Sam ingested drug XX, but Sam doesn't know that yet. And Sam comes to believe that, a doctor came in, he said I have reliable cognitive faculties, and then later comes to believe that he ingested drug XX. But I know that Sam ingested drug XX prior to coming to that belief. Now, would I have rational grounds to believe that Sam's cognitive faculties are reliable? Well, clearly not, because Sam's belief that he has reliable cognitive faculties came in after ingested drug XX. So I can conclude that Sam's belief that he passed cognitive reliability tests was probably the result of unreliable cognitive faculties, because the drug XX has that effect, most likely, of likely rendering one's cognitive faculties unreliable. And to me, that seems to be the same principle for S2 and S3, because the XX mutation has already probably affected your cognitive faculties unreliable after that point. It seems like it's
I think it's very important to keep this in the first person context, because we're interested here in what we can rationally believe. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to look at S2 rather than S1. So if I have, okay, so let's set this up this way. I have a whole bunch of beliefs that I have a whole bunch of beliefs about my cognitive faculties being reliable, right? Or at least minimally reliable. And then I come to believe that I have XX mutation. I have the XX mutation. Now, you're saying that should act as a defeater for my beliefs because the XX mutation would have occurred prior to me forming those other beliefs, right?
Yeah.
So I'm asking why that acts as a defeater. Is it, before you just say because of scenario S2, because I want to just focus here, is it because now we feel that we can't tell the difference between whether our beliefs are actually reliable or whether we just think they're reliable because of the XX mutation?
Well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
There's more to the point is just the effect of the drug XX itself. And it seems to me, just like it is in scenario S1, that any belief that comes after ingested drug XX, any belief that relies on cognitive faculties that come after having ingested drug XX and no further independent reason, that seems to undermine that would be evidence.
Yeah, well, you keep saying it seems to undermine. I'm trying to understand the reasoning behind it. And the reason, let me just jump to the end here, because it seems to me that this is basically, again, an argument for global skepticism. Because I could say, well, look, what if I'm a brain in a vat? If I was a brain in a vat, then all of my beliefs that come after that would be suspect, right? So I can't actually reject that. So what does this have to do with N and E, I guess, is the greater point here. Is this not just an argument for global skepticism? Because if it were the case that we were a brain in a vat, then any cognitive reliability test that we took would be suspect, would be defeated by the same argument here.
Well, the difference here is that brain in a vat scenarios are just presented as bare possibility. In this case, naturalistic evolution, supposedly anyway, is probability, not mere possibility. So in S3, for example, it isn't just the fact that naturalism and evolution, it's possible that we have unreliable cognitive faculties. It's that NNE entails the XX mutation, rendering it likely that we have unreliable cognitive faculties.
Well, but that's the issue that I was harping on about for ages before, because I don't accept that. You're just telling me that's a bare possibility that NNE entails a mutation, because I don't think it does, right? Just as I don't think that we're brain in a vat, I don't think that NNE does entail that our cognitive faculties are probably unreliable. So where's the symmetry breaker there? As a naturalist, right?
So a bit confused. So which premise are you disputing here?
Well, it was, I believe, premise 12. That
right. Let's look at here. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not sure that I have to be committed to that, because all of this is quite suspect to me, to be honest. So maybe just sort of if we can focus on the logic here, right? Do you think that that my beliefs that, let's put naturalism to the side for a moment and just sort of not say whether I'm a naturalist or not. Maybe I'm a theist. Like, do you think that that my beliefs that my cognitive faculties are reliable should be defeated because of the possibility that I'm a brain in a vat?
Not from the possibility, no.
Okay, like, because a priori you can't rule that out, right? So that sort of structure applies. Well, maybe you think you can, but it seems to me that we can't rule that out a priori. Okay, so, but you think that as a naturalist, my belief that my cognitive faculties are reliable should be defeated by, well, the fact that I believe by evolution and naturalism. So I don't think that that's the case, right? Because that, to me, that's just a mere possibility, as you put it, that NNE entail that our cognitive faculties are unreliable. Yeah, that's a possibility that I can't rule out a priori, just as I can't rule out the brain in a vat scenario. But why am I allowed to rule out the brain in a vat, but not allowed to rule out the naturalism and evolution case?
Because of the probability thesis.
Can you explain why that's relevant here?
Yeah. So the probability given naturalism and evolution that our cognitive faculties are reliable is low. That's what the probability thesis says. So it's one thing to say brain in a vat as a bare possibility. It's quite another to say that I have this belief, and this belief entails that I probably am a brain in a vat right now.
No, but I don't believe that that belief entails that. Also, the probability thesis could easily be recast in terms of brain in a vat. So the probability of our cognitive faculties being reliable given brain in a vat is low, right? So
Yeah.
I can just substitute that out. So where is the symmetry breaker here between brain in a vat probability thesis and naturalism probability thesis?
Well, it's quite simple. A naturalist would believe naturalism is true, whereas I do not believe that the brain in vat thesis is true.
Yeah, but a naturalist doesn't accept that that our cognitive faculties are the probability of our cognitive faculties being reliable is low under naturalism. They only accept that it's low a priori. And I would ask you, do you believe that it's low a priori that our cognitive faculties, the probability of our cognitive faculties would be reliable, given that we're a brain in a vat?
I don't think
It seems
a
that you
priori
would.
is. No, the probability thesis isn't a priori exactly. So the alien scenario, remember, there is a priori knowledge, but there's also a posteriori knowledge. So the a posteriori knowledge in that scenario is naturalism and evolution. So it's really about the evidential relations between propositions and an
Well, I asked about this before. How is naturalism and evolution an a posteriori knowledge? We've come to believe that on the basis of a whole bunch of evidence, but then all of that other a posteriori evidence and reasons I have for believing NNE, that's going to factor in. This undermines the whole defeater thesis. The whole defeater thesis is supposed to be purely NNE. But if you're saying I'm coming to believe NNE a posteriori, then I'm going to appeal to just like a whole swath of reasons for thinking that our cognitive faculties are not unreliable.
Okay, well then
the very things that you disallow me to appeal to before, because you said no, it's only NNE. You're not allowed to appeal to anything else.
Well, because that's a probability thesis. Probability thesis is only NNE. The defeater thesis, on the other hand, we can ask: does additional information manage to perform a defeater deflector? And that's what the argument from the defeater thesis is here. Now, I consider that in the paper. For example, in scenario S2, would additional a posteriori knowledge in scenario S2 overmine the effects of the probability thesis there? And my view was that, well, no, it doesn't. Not if it becomes long after having ingested drug XX. So what about S3? Would additional a posteriori information do that? Well, I would say, no, it doesn't. Not if all that information came in after drug XX was inserted into our bloodstream. And so that is where I think the crux would lie. Yeah, in my opinion. So if you want, maybe it will help if I can put on my naturalism hat and say how I would attack this argument.
Feel free.
All right. How I would attack this argument is I would bite the bullet for the probability thesis. And but I would actually dispute scenario S2 here. And you might say, well, how could you reasonably reject scenario S2? Well, what I've sort of been implicitly assuming through this argument here is a kind of at least a sort of weak internalism for justification. So for those who don't know epistemology, internalism is the idea that our justification works through internal factors of the mind, and externalism is where justification works through external factors. So I would say that, okay, yes, given just the propositional evidence, it seems quite likely that I have unreliable cognitive faculties. But suppose I ingest drug XX, but I have the blocking gene, and I still have the intuition that my cognitive faculties are reliable, and that intuition is veridical because my cognitive faculties are functioning properly. And because of that, my intuition that my cognitive faculties are reliable, combined with the fact that my cognitive faculties are in fact reliable, is what gives me warrant, that gives me knowledge that my cognitive faculties are reliable despite having ingested drug XX. And that would then carry down through scenarios S3 and S4. And that was how I would say that despite the probability thesis, despite the having just drug XX having been inserted into my bloodstream, I'm nonetheless warranted in believing my cognitive faculties are reliable. That's how I would attack this argument, because I don't think just adding a bunch of propositions afterwards, if they come in having after ingested drug XX, will suffice. For the same reason they don't in scenario S2.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of an approach of externalism that would be fairly popular among a lot of philosophers. I myself don't really go in for externalist theories of justification, but I suppose if I was faced between the choice of having to accept the conclusion of this argument and having to accept epistemic externalism rather, then I would, I think, go with epistemic externalism. But so that's an interesting line there. So do you think that this argument sort of presupposes some sort of internalist?
Well, sort of
theory.
So it does say that internal factors are relevant. And so the reason why I'm not convinced by that externalist critique, even though that externalism is really the best way I can think of to attack this argument, if I were a naturalist, is that there has to be some limits to what external factors can result in. So for example, I believe I have ingested drug XXX, and drug XXX has a 100% chance of rendering my cognitive faculties are reliable. Now, could I be rational in believing that my cognitive faculties are reliable while at the same time also believe that I have ingested drug XXX? Well, no, I can't, because that would actually be an explicit contradiction. So a disputable point, I guess, would be, okay, so where's the dividing line here? Is it anything short of 100% provided a feeder, or will 99.9% chance do? I think it's, by my lights, I'm sort of at least a weak internalist, and that I think the internalist factors are relevant enough so that my cognitive faculty, that I would actually have a defeater for my cognitive faculties are reliable in scenario S2, even if it were the case that I have a blocking gene. And all my propositional evidence would come in long after having ingested drug XX. So that's why I was talking about propositional evidence, where you're talking about a posteriori beliefs. The non-propositional warrant would just be the intuition that my cognitive faculties are reliable. And I think the non-propositional source of justification would be it's the only salvation I can see for naturalism at any rate.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm still oh, excuse me. Hang on, I need a cough. Excuse me. I'm still a bit puzzled by the nature of the conclusion here. So there's sort of one last thread here that, well, I mean, we've been talking about it, but let's see if we can make a little bit of progress here. So PR given NNE is low, okay? Now we understand that to mean that, can we stay on that slide actually?
Okay.
Well, maybe it doesn't matter, but yeah, so I was just looking at this here. PR given NNE is low. Now we understand that to mean an epistemic probability based on what is known a priori.
Well, not quite a priori. It's naturalism and evolution, given just naturalism and evolution.
Yes, well, the whole argument for the probability thesis rested on a priori considerations, because as soon as we were able to invoke a metaphysical thesis that is knowable a posteriori, then the argument collapses. So it only...
well, because our a posteriori knowledge is not that we know it exactly a priori, because the a posteriori knowledge, the only basically admissible a posteriori knowledge is naturalism and evolution, and nothing else.
All right, so I don't understand why we should care about that probability there. It seems to be entirely concocted and artificial, because you said, look, the only a posteriori knowledge that I'm allowed is N and E, nothing else.
For the probability thesis, yes.
Well, and the defeater thesis, because that's what we're saying here.
Well, not yes and no. So you can consider the a posteriori knowledge, like I kind of mentioned in the paper and in this presentation, scenario S2, where suppose you can come by this a posteriori beliefs of passing cognitive reliability tests, but all these a posteriori beliefs come in long after having ingested drug XX. I argued that, well, because you believe you came by these beliefs long after having ingested drug XX, those a posteriori beliefs are undermined. And I think the same thing would hold true for scenarios S3 and S4 as well.
Yeah, okay, so this comes back to what we were talking about before, and I'm still not got it clear in my mind how we make a jump here between talking about what is the case, or like what's stipulated to be the case in S3 and what's stipulated to be the case in S4. So what is the case in S4? Let's try to do this again, because I'm still a little unclear here. What does scenario S4 say?
scenario S4. Let's see here. Better get this straight. Okay. In scenario S4, the probability thesis is true, but I initially don't believe it. Instead, I'm the product of a sort of evolution that makes my cognitive reliability very likely. Later, however, I study philosophy and see for myself that the probability thesis is true. But however, after that, I come to believe that I have an extensive battery of tests that establish my reliability. But since this belief came in long after naturalistic evolution created my cognitive faculties, and I believe that given any naturalistic evolution has a high probability of giving me unreliable cognitive faculties, it seems this would be evidence for my cognitive reliability is undermined by the effects of naturalistic evolution, similar to how naturalistic evolution giving me the XX mutation does in scenario S3 undermines my would-be evidence for R.
Okay, well, yeah, so that appears similar to what I have as S6 from, as you said, an older version. And I'm looking at that text now, and it seems the issue here is that you've said that, let me get the words right here. I believe that given NNE, naturalistic evolution has a high probability of giving me unreliable cognitive faculties, right? But that statement is really irrelevant because, that again, when we say given NNE, naturalistic evolution has a high probability of giving me unreliable cognitive faculties, that means given only NNE. That doesn't mean I actually believe, all things considered, that evolution has a high probability of giving me unreliable cognitive faculties. You're saying conditional only on this information. And I'm asking, why are we restricting the analysis to only that information? That's entirely artificial.
Well, we could apply the same reasoning to scenario S3. Yes, given only naturalism and evolution and the fact that X mutation, and the probability that I have unreliable cognitive faculties is quite high. But I could say, well, I have additional information, like I passed cognitive reliability test. So you can apply the same sort of try to escape the cognitively disastrous scenario in both scenarios S3 and S4.
So what's the problem?
So in S3, I don't think that works for the same reason it doesn't work in scenario S2. And the reason why I don't think it works in scenario S2 is because these beliefs come in long in after drug XX has entered the bloodstream. It comes in after this thing that has affected our cognitive faculties has happened.
Yes, but this is what I keep harping on here, and you keep denying is relevant. In scenarios S1 through S3, you have stipulated, well, certainly in S1 and 2, and I think it's in S3 as well, you have stipulated that there is this thing that causes my cognitive faculties to be unreliable.
Well, it has a high probability of causing your cognitive faculties to be unreliable.
Yes, correct. Okay, whereas the naturalist doesn't believe that. Under S4, the naturalist doesn't believe that. Well, first of all, that's not stipulated to be the case, and the naturalist also doesn't believe it. So it's one thing to say, look, it is actually the case that there is this thing that probably causes your cognitive faculties to be unreliable. In that case, well, yeah, then that's going to have negative epistemic consequences. But S4 doesn't say anything about that there actually is any such thing.
Well, that's not quite happened because our cognitive faculties are a product of naturalistic evolution.
Yeah. In scenario S4, does naturalistic evolution cause your cognitive faculties to be probably unreliable in scenario S4?
Epistemically speaking, yes.
No, that's not true. It's only true if you only condition on NNE. That's what the scenario said. You read it out, and it said conditioning on NNE, and based on what we've discussed so far, that means only conditioning on that.
That's also true in S3.
No, because then, okay, let's ask the question: does NNE cause it to be the case in scenario S3 that my cognitive faculties are probably unreliable?
Via the probability thesis, yes.
No, given what's stated in S3.
Yes, via the probability thesis.
Well, okay, maybe, again, we keep coming up with this point. NNE entails XX mutation. What does that mean?
The probability that that we have the XX mutation given naturalism and evolution is 1.
Okay, so it is a probability claim again. Okay, fine. So S3 and S4 are both making probability claims. So then would push back to S2. So yeah, that's what I was saying. I wasn't clear about which S3 was. But S1 and S2 then, they are saying that the drug causes us probably to have unreliable cognitive faculties, whereas S3 and S4 don't say that. Or the mutation causing that. Well, all it says is that the probability conditional only on NNE is high, but that's different to saying it actually does. Okay, so it looks like it might be premise 11 that I'm disagreeing with, not the jump from 3 to 4, but from 2 to 3, because I misunderstood about whether that was a probability statement in S3 there.
Oh, they're all probability statements.
No. S3 is saying I ingest the drug and a drug has this consequence, not just I believe that it has the consequence.
Well, S2 says I ingest drug XX, but I also
Does
believe
drug
that.
have that consequence or not? Or do I just believe that it has the consequence in that scenario?
It does.
Okay, that's the difference. That's not just a probability statement. That is saying in this scenario, the drug actually has that consequence. In S3 and S4, you are not saying that. You're saying natural evolution. You're not saying that they do have this consequence. You're just saying I believe that they do, conditioned only on my belief in entity. That is the critical difference.
Well, no, in S3 and S4, the probability theses are actually true.
Yes, but that's irrelevant because the probability, in my opinion, because that is artificially restricting what we believe, restricting what we're considering about our beliefs, only conditioned on N and E. But I have lots of other beliefs as well. So I was not going to be
You could
low
apply the
under
same thing
all
for
of my
scenario
beliefs.
S2, though. You can
No,
apply the
you
same...
can't, because you have stated that drug XX actually does cause my cognitive faculty to be probably unreliable. That's the difference. Not just that I have a restricted type of belief that it does. It actually does in S2. So I'd have a false belief if I believed otherwise.
Well, in S3, that is also true through the
No, it's not, because
thesis.
you've just told me you haven't said that entity actually do entail the XX mutation, only that I believe
No, they do.
that
They do in scenario S3.
But that's what I asked before, and you said it was the opposite when I asked.
No, I didn't say that before.
Oh, for goodness sake.
I
Is it
said
the
the
case
probability...
that entity actually... No, okay, probability is not the same as the actual state of affairs. We've got to get this clear, right? Probability is an epistemic claim about my knowledge, and actual state of affairs is what pertains. In scenario S3, does the actual state of affairs of natural and evolution cause the XX mutation, or is it merely my belief in it, conditional on entity, that is that renders my cognitive faculties unreliable? Is it a probability claim about epistemics, or is it an actual metaphysical claim in S3? I feel like you keep flipping between this, because I've asked this question so many times, and you've said yes sometimes and no other times.
I think I've been pretty consistent in saying that the probability that the XX mutation...
Probability.
Exists... Yes.
Okay, so not actually, just the probability, epistemic belief. Why do I keep saying epistemic belief? That's redundant. I apologize for that. The belief.
The epistemic... I'll try again. The epistemic probability that I have the XX mutation given NNE is 1.
In S3, we're talking about here.
Yes.
Okay, so it is not true that NNE causes the XX mutation in S3. Only that I believe that it does.
Okay, the epistemic probability of NNE given... So that is that probability belief is actually correct in this scenario.
Okay, so it is a claim about what is the case. Okay, so then I do disagree with the jump between S3 and S4. It's very different to say that I have a belief in something and that belief is true. That's what I'm trying to distinguish in S3. So if it is the case that NNE actually causes the X mutation, then I'm going to say, look, that's not the case in S4. At least that's not... I don't think that's the case as a naturalist in S4. So that's the difference.
So what do you mean by naturalistic evolution causing the XX mutation?
But that's the whole claim behind this, right? That under naturalism, well, this was the whole setup of the probability thesis, right? There's this story about that there's an epistemic possibility, a priori, like as far as we know, a priori, that I could have garbage mental states because maybe the necessary metaphysical supervenience relation doesn't hold, a priori. As a result of that, conditional only on NNE, the probability that I have garbage mental states is high. That was the probability thesis. And that's what appears to be appealed to in S3. However, under S4, now you're telling me that the mere fact of the probability thesis means that I should actually believe that my cognitive faculties are actually unreliable. But that's a jump, because now you're saying, instead of just saying, look, a priori conditional only on NNE and not anything else, I should believe that I have garbage mental states. And you're going from that to saying, I should actually believe, given everything that I know, or believe at least, that I have garbage mental states. That's why S4 is different to S3, because you're now only saying, look, conditional on this, given this particular belief.
Well, why would that work in S4 but not in S3?
Because in S3, this is what we were just talking about. In S3, you told me it is actually the case that naturalism and evolution produce garbage mental states most of the time.
No, and in scenario S3, again, very important to get this precise here, is that the probability that I have the XX mutation given NNE is 1.
Yes, and then I asked, is it actually the case that NNE causes the XX mutation in S3? And you said it does.
In the sense that because naturalistic evolution, if it exists, would create the XX mutation.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. So that's different to S4, which does not state that.
Well, it's true that the mechanism probable cognitive unreliability is different there, but I don't see how that's
No, but there's
relevant difference.
cognitive
because you could
unreliability has
say
not been
that
established in S4. It's asserted in S3 because you've said NNE actually does cause the X mutation, but S4 doesn't say that. All it says is that I believe that given only NNE, which, okay,
No,
sure, but I have
S4
other beliefs.
No, and S4 says the probability thesis is actually true there.
Yeah, but that just means that the probability of R is that the probability under only NNE of garbage mental states is high. That's all that says. It doesn't actually say that. I probably did. Sorry, it doesn't actually say that naturalism and evolution leads to mostly garbage mental states. It just says that the probability of that is high given only NNE. That's the difference here. So I'm just saying I don't have to. I'm not constrained as a naturalist to only believe NNE. I'm allowed to believe lots of other things as well, in virtue of which R is not low. It's actually high.
Well, the person in scenario S3 could do the very same thing.
Well, in doing so, they would have a false belief, which
Why?
is not true in S4. They would have a false belief because you've told me that NNE actually does cause the X mutation.
Yeah, it does, but they could still have other beliefs. Why would it be false to believe that they have the blocking gene, that they pass cognitive reliability tests?
Oh, well, so this is the blocking gene issue again. Yeah, so it wouldn't be false to believe they had a blocking gene. And indeed, if they had good reason to think that, then that would obviate the scenario again. So this is what pushed us back to scenario 1 and 2 before, right?
Yes.
But in that case, what's the problem then? So this would, just to clarify this would be equivalent to saying, basically, in S4, I think I have good reasons for thinking that R is actually high under NNE, just in it, like not just NNE. In addition, I'm adding other things in there. Likewise, I may have other good reasons for thinking in S3 that I actually have the blocking gene. I may have those reasons in S1 and 2 as well.
So, and my objection to that in the paper and in this debate was, it seems that if those beliefs come in after drug XX, it seems those beliefs would be undermined.
Right. And that is what's different in S4, because we haven't asserted that there is any XX mutation or drug X. So there's no, like, how do we know that they come before or afterwards?
Well, because naturalistic evolution is what is responsible for giving us our cognitive faculties.
Yes, but naturalism, excuse me, naturalism and evolution will only undermine my cognitive faculties if I don't have the blocking gene, to use that comparison.
Right.
Now, you've told me. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So in both cases, naturalistic in S3 and S4, naturalistic evolution is what is responsible for giving us our cognitive faculties. Yeah. And the likelihood, again, given just an NNE, both in S3 and in S4, likelihood given just NNE, that naturalistic evolution gives us unreliable cognitive faculties is high. That is true in both in S3 and S4. And both in S3 and S4, a person could say, well, I have all these other, it's true that given just NNE, I have unreliable cognitive faculties, likely. I don't just believe that, I have also these other beliefs. Yep. That is something one could say both in S3 and S4.
Yes, that seems true. So then what's the problem?
Well, the problem I get, and this is where it seems to be our disputable point,
right,
is that like in S2, if I come by these beliefs after drug XX entered my bloodstream, it seems those beliefs are undermined after that. And that would seem to be the case for S3. And that case would seem to be similar. And if it's true in S3, it also seems to be true in S4. Because in both cases, this happens after the relevant thing has affected our cognitive faculties.
But it seems that they're only undermined if I don't have the blocking gene. If I have the blocking gene, then they don't undermine it.
And that's where you come into the externalism rebuttal that I gave earlier. That if
I don't think you have to appeal to sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, and the externalism thing I came in scenario S2. So what a naturalist could say is that, well, if I do have the blocking gene in scenario S2, then even if I come to the belief that I have the blocking gene after having adjusted drug XX, it doesn't matter because I actually do have the blocking gene.
I don't know that you have to appeal to externalism to make that appeal. What's the externalism? I'm not saying that not having the blocking gene like causes it. I mean, the idea of externalism is that, this is for our audience, right? That states of affairs sort of external to our mental states, like non-beliefs basically can have justificatory power, but I don't, or can justify propositions. So states of affairs that are non-mental can justify our beliefs. But I'm not sure that you need to appeal to that here. It seems to me that in S1 and S2, the ingestion of the drug would only undermine my belief in my cognitive faculties if it is actually the case that I didn't have the what was it again, the blocking gene.
Blocking, yeah, but that's the external factor I'm talking about. The fact that you don't actually have the.
Yeah, but that's not the claim I'm making. I'm saying my belief. Well, okay, so the thing is that in an internalist view, ingesting a drug cannot have any effect on your justification, right? Because it's got to be a belief that justifies other beliefs. So it would have to be that your belief in ingesting the drug in 1 and 2 defeated your belief in your cognitive faculties being reliable. But what I'm saying is that would only be true if I didn't also had a belief that I had the blocking gene.
Okay, but in scenario S2, what happens if you come to the belief that you have the blocking gene days after you ingested drug XX? Would your belief be undermined?
I'm not sure why it would.
Okay, I think that's really our disputable point here is that, well, maybe.
Why would it?
So I think maybe our really disputable point here is premise 10.
Perhaps so.
That seems to be it here, because if you don't believe that if I ingest drug XX, but I come to believe that I have the blocking gene days later after I believe I ingested drug XX, because that's what scenario 2 is, both in the presentation and the paper, that I ingest drug XX, but I come to the belief that I have the blocking gene, that I passed cognitive reliability test days after that. But it seems to me that belief is undermined by the fact that I believe I ingested drug XX.
If you replace ingesting drug XX by being a brain in a vat, how does you not get the same result here?
Well, I actually think you do. If you actually do believe that you're a brain in a vat, then that would undermine your beliefs.
Oh, I see. So yeah, you're quite right there. Right. Yeah, but well, it seems to me then that it does. So the whole issue here depends on whether you think that believing that you ingest a drug, in this case here, would undermine other beliefs that you have about your cognitive faculties being reliable. And I just don't see why they would. I mean, if they were sufficiently powerful as general reasons, right? But the point is that just merely in virtue of believing that, because I could have very strong reasons for believing other things. So why does this one belief automatically trump everything else?
Okay, so it seems we found our disputable point here, and that are differing intuitive perceptions, and that it seems to me by my intuitions that if these beliefs come in long after you believe you ingested drug XX, those beliefs are undermined by the belief that you ingested drug XX previously, and you do not share that same intuition. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't actually know that that's the entirety of the dispute, but yeah, that's definitely part of it here.
Okay, so in that case, it seems like you would dispute premise 10 here, where R is defeated in scenario S1, but R is not defeated in scenario S2. S1 is where Sam ingests drug XX.
Yeah, I think that I also am not convinced about the leap between 3 and 4, but you're right. There are further disputes here as well.
These are 12 is a material conditional.
Yeah.
So the only way 12 can be false is if R is defeated in S3 and R is not defeated in S4.
Yeah, I mean, I've just been arguing repeatedly that I think that it may well be the case that it could be not defeated in S4, but defeated in S3. That's what we're talking about. But as you pointed out, it may not be limited to that, because I don't
think that, because if you believe that R is not defeated in scenario S2, I don't think you have any reason to believe that R should be defeated in scenario S3, because you come by these beliefs after, for the same reason. The same reason applies. You could say, well, yes, drug XX came before, but I have all these other beliefs. And the fact that these beliefs came in after drug XX.
Well, if you're wanting to tell me that I should accept your material conditional because both the antecedent and the consequent are false, then that's just a trivial case. I'm not really interested in debating.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. So you wouldn't dispute.
But that's a frivolous case, right? I could say that about all of these.
Well, yeah, but it's important to accurately identify which premise would be under dispute here, I think. So it seems like premise 10 here is the one you would dispute. And I guess that's a good stopping point. Because have we been...
I just want to raise one question quickly, but I think it won't take long because I've already mentioned it before. But can the defeater thesis not be modified for anything that's not naturalism and evolution? I don't think I said before about, say, theism.
I don't think it can.
Why not? Like, what's specific about naturalism here? It doesn't actually seem that it's doing any work here.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of other beliefs could be used. I don't think all beliefs, other than
Okay, not all beliefs, sure, not all beliefs, but theism was the example I gave before. Just theism, omnitheism. Why wouldn't that be able to be put in here as well? Given, of course, the probability thesis, which we argued plausibly could have a replacement argument made there.
Okay, well, that's big. So this comes into what Plantinga called the conditionalization problem. What stuff can be associated after that? And for me, I think that we know that God is perfectly good on theism, by the definition of theism. And I think knowledge of what is good and what is bad would also be relevant information. Though I suppose people could dispute that.
Well, yeah, so you're going to tell a story about why you think that this wouldn't happen under theism, but then I'm going to tell a story about, I mean, I could ask you similar questions about, well, did you come to believe that before or after you injected the drug and things like that? I feel like that the symmetry is going to be there, and you may well reject that, but that seems to me an issue here about when we think we come to believe in things and what we can know in what order of when. And I think that is an issue with this argument.
All right, so I will. Ooh, look at that echo there. I'll stop sharing my screen here. Oh, there we go. So,
are we doing questions or?
Are we doing questions? The chat was going pretty hot, but mostly banter. Okay, here's something that looks like a question. Oh, where did it go? Oh, it's more of a statement, something that stood out for me. Hang on, let me just... What do you make of that? The OPI endpoint, a deductive argument just leads to subjective disagreement. Does that ring true?
Well, a lot of what. Oh yeah. So what I've discovered when you have philosophical conversations is, I think, kind of like the goal. Like one of the goals I think for philosophical dispute is to try to find the point of intuitive divergence. Where do people's intuitions differ here? In our case, for me, it seems that if I believe that, come to believe that I have the blocking gene long after I believe I ingest drug XX, that belief would be undermined. So, and yeah, so a lot of times it just comes to people having different intuitive perceptions in philosophy. Reasonable people can have slightly different perceptions.
If I can follow up on that, because I think that that's a good question. I mean, obviously we knew at the outset that we didn't agree about this argument. The purpose here is, I think, to try to help people think through this for themselves. I don't know how much we succeeded in that today, but perhaps there was some useful comments made. But the other thing I would say is that I didn't mention this before because this is a bit of a conversation stopper, but it might be good to mention now. I am very distrustful of these sorts of arguments that appeal to sort of intuitions about particularly sort of counterfactual or strange scenarios involving blocker genes and things like that. I mean, I may have an intuitive, thoughts about them as we've sort of discussed, but I don't really trust those to be ironically, I don't really trust those to be particularly reliable. And so I'm pretty skeptical of philosophical arguments that sort of depend heavily on these sorts of thought experiments. Obviously, that's a judgment that's going to relate to what methodologies we think are appropriate philosophically, and that gets beyond the discussion here. But I think that that's something to think about as to what methodologies we think are most useful in these sorts of discussions.
Well, for me, it's is the argument logically valid, and do we have adequate grounds to believe that the premises are true, regardless whether they're hypothetical scenarios or not?
Yeah, well, just to clarify, if the way we judge whether we have good reasons for accepting a premise is based on an intuitive reaction to or intuitive thought about a hypothetical scenario, then I think that that's that's a defeater, or at least it can be in a lot of cases. That's all I was saying.
Wade, do you have a sort of a background in maths, like an extensive background in maths? Is it?
Well, it's not that extensive. If anybody read my paper and is like a mathematician, they would know that. Well, that's significant math, but I don't see that sufficient evidence that he majored in math. And this is, I mean, as far as math can get incredibly complex. I only minored in mathematics, but I know enough to prove the theorems that I did in the paper. So I have some math background, but it's quite insignificant compared to what a professional mathematician would know.
Oh, okay. It's hard for me to decipher which of these questions are actually serious. I'm gonna. Where is it? This one.
The answer is nothing, because it's about the supervenience relations between the mental states and the physical states. Given just naturalism and evolution, it's unlikely that the strong supervenience relation would be such that we would have reliable cognitive faculties. That's why I mentioned in the paper and in this presentation, mental states being effectively epiphenomenal, because given no matter which conceivable mental state associations obtained for a given physical state, the resulting outcome would be the same, including the allele frequencies, phenotypes, selection pressures, and so forth.
Yeah, and if I can just make a comment about that. So I don't agree with epiphenomenalism. We haven't really debated that in this debate, because the probability thesis was couched in terms of that we can't know a priori that that this supervenience relation holds. I think we have good reasons to think that there is a supervenience relation here. But of course, that would be then adding additional premises into the argument, which was one of the main points of dispute. What sort of knowledge are you allowed to condition on? Yeah, so this question comes because I have a little sort of joke thing that I do on my videos, which is to rate people's bookshelves in when I'm responding to videos, just because it's sort of so common. I actually can't really see MC's bookshelf because it's kind of blurred out, but it is quite an impressive collection, I will say that.
Yes, it's the magic of F2.8.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, I don't know if there's much more going on here. There was a lot of joking in the chat going on. Oh, okay.
I like
hang on.
Alan
Here's
Turing's remark. Do you think it's reasonable to ask which premise you disagree with if your argument has more than 40 premises?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Because that is how philosophy works. You identify a specific step in the reasoning that you disagree with, because the only way a valid argument can be sound is with a false premise. And so it's certainly nice if you want to make philosophical progress to identify which premise you think is false, if you believe the argument is unsound.
I think it just didn't make for so much of an entertaining debate. In terms of entertainment value, it was.
Are you not entertained?
Well, I hope you guys
had a dance.
I hope you guys had fun. And yeah, it's just great for two different points of views to come together and go at it and see if something new can flourish from that. I always enjoy listening to James. So this is the second time I've heard James talk, and just how he approaches things is very personable. Someone mentioned in the chat. How was your experience, Wade, with how James was debating James? How was it for you?
I liked it. We actually made some progress. We identified a point of intuitive divergence, a specific premise, and I consider it like a sort of successful debate. What if we can actually manage to hit bedrock, as opposed to just like going to circles where nothing resolves? It's like, okay, your intuition say this, and your intuition say that. Here's exactly where my and your intuitions differ as regards to a premise.
And James, from your side, Wade's presentation was very dealing with that whole paper and all the points and stuff, coming at it sort of quite thick and fast. How was your experience of that for you?
Yeah, I had seen a similar version of this presentation, and I do find it a bit hard to follow in parts because it is quite dense. I'm grateful for Wade's time and for your time as well in facilitating. I do think that we made some progress. I think I did get a little bit frustrated at one point where I felt that Wade was being a bit inconsistent. Maybe I was just being a bit slow in understanding what his point was. So I do apologize if I was a bit terse there. But I think that, we did identify a few points of disagreement. I think just to emphasize, I think one of the key issues here is sort of what are you allowed to sort of conditionalize on, and sort of when are you allowed to conditionalize it, and what effect does that have for particular thought experiments and premises? And Wade identified that as well as something Plantinga has mentioned. I think that is one of the cruxes of this argument from my point of view. So if there's one take home, I might suggest that could be the take home.
Okay, nice. Well, thanks once again for your time. There's close to 40 people tuned in earlier on, and a lot of heat in the chat. A lot of going on in the chat there. If you want to have a bit of a laugh later, you can have a read through. But yes, thanks guys. We'll sign off here.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.